All right, we're live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking About Survivor. I am Christiana Ellis.
I am Mike Mateen.
Tonight, we're talking about Survivor Season 35, Heroes, Healers, Hustlers, Episode 1, the premiere. Fairly solid premiere. I feel like they've got the the formula down now. Even without needing to have, returning customers, contestants.
Yeah.
So general impressions. What was your take on the premiere?
I mean, it's pretty good for a premiere where we don't have returning customer or contestants.
Yeah.
Because it's, a little bit of getting to know people. They tried to inject some drama that ended up failing for good reason. I think, which we can get into that. But the challenge was interesting. The people seem interesting. It wasn't like, oh my God, that's the greatest opening episode I've ever seen. It was pretty standard for a non-returner. Like in the returner ones, like you get a little extra drama because you already have an investment in who they are. Mm-hmm. So they dial up a little bit. And sometimes those people dial it up on purpose because, they already have kind of an equity in the game.
Right.
And a reputation and a thing, so they sort of play to their character or they play to be different than their character. And so that you get that little bit of extra. That's kind of interesting. But when it's literally just like, let's get to know people and have some challenges and let's try to throw this neat twist in to mix things up, to see if that makes things interesting and get it off on a good foot. And like I said, ultimately, it makes sense why it failed.
Yeah, well, it was one of those things where the nature of the situation is that you can't control, or they've decided not to control who finds it initially, and so it's always just going to come down to what that person decides to do with it. And in this case, we have, 2 layers removed where, one person finds it, decides who to give it to, and then that person. Although what I will say is that I think in this episode, even more than sometimes happens, I feel like there must have been conversations that we just didn't see, because I think we get the impression afterwards that Chrissy didn't want to save Katrina, but we had no indication that that was going to be the case. The editing had spun it as though they were the 2 that were on the out, kind of pairing them for our benefit. But I guess that was never really a thing with them.
Well, I think it was until, she saw, she didn't want to go just against the grain for the sake of doing it, Mm-hmm. It wasn't strong enough for her that they needed to make a stand right there or make a statement. It's there's plenty of time to break up the power couple. There's plenty of time. It makes sense. She's not the weakest on the team, but she is a weaker just by nature of being older. Could weaken them in challenges. It's don't. And this comes back to, again, with where you don't have the returning contestants who feel this desire because they already have, they have so much equity into the game already that they don't want to move slow at the beginning. And so we're kind of used to that. Whereas this makes more sense for somebody who has no true allegiances. Why mess with that? You may need these people later. Mm-hmm. Let's try to stay strong, win a few more challenges. What's the point in upsetting it when it's not me that's being targeted?
Yeah. Because there's the element of well, why did whoever it was give it to you? And even if she says she doesn't know, it suggests that there might be a relationship with someone else on the other tribes, which people don't like. And and
you have to be very
upsetting people's plans and then still being in the minority. And
right, you upset people's plans, you're still in the minority. You now have a target because clearly you have potential ally on another tribe. And why do that when you're like, yeah, okay, I liked her and it would have been fun to work with her, and it does feel like the other two are this power couple. It would be great to break them up. But, I'm only really like totally aligned with her because they all are so tight and I just kind of got left on the outside. But if I'm getting invited in, why just do this, just to do it?
Right.
And then it's just me and her against what I guess would have been still three of them. And it's like, it just made sense for her. And I was really happy, as much as, the drama and the fireworks would be cool and are interesting from a long game standpoint.
Yeah, it was probably the smarter decision for her to not use it.
Yes. So I really liked her play in this, and it does seem in the previews for next time that she is managing to now find an in now that she's not just automatically ostracized with
the mom squad.
Right. The mom, now that there's not that easy label on them and she's just kind of part of the tribe, she's able to start having conversations because they haven't just been cut off and building these, false alliances just based on, who is most similar. And so it was the right move. Again, going back to when you don't know people as well, like you want to be around longer in a less contentious situation so that you can get to know who really makes sense to work with and who really makes sense to have a long-term, who's really trustworthy.
Right.
When it's sort of this artifice at the beginning, you don't want to be making bold decisions based on that,
So on that note, you mentioned a couple of times already the idea of breaking up the power couple. And I know that Alan was one of your sort of initial picks going in, just I think because you kind of knew him from football and were maybe going to, tentatively rooting for him based on the, the pre-show. What was your take on him in the premiere here?
When you go back and look at all of it combined, I really like it.
Okay.
In the moment, it was hard to believe because it felt in the moment like he was just acting crazy and then rationalizing it later, like, oh, I was doing that to just kind of get everybody on edge a little bit and see where things kind of fell out and shook out and see what that did, whether that changed people's minds or, whether this alliance was truly that strong. But when it all played out, it looked like that was exactly what he was doing. And it was a gamesmanship thing. And I 100% believe it. You can roll your eyes all you want. I believe it was gamesmanship. I believe that was his strategy, was to make people uncomfortable.
Well, okay. So I can buy in that it was a strategy. I don't think it was a good one because all it seemed to do, as far as I can tell, is make the people who were 100% with him now unsure and wary of him.
See, but that's why I say when you look at it in totality, because it felt like by the end, because they had sort of gone through that rocky, he basically made everybody take a stand. He made it, there's either it's not just sort of hey, we're all sort of together. He's like, no, I'm going to make this uncomfortable. And if we can all stay together through this, then we're going to come through stronger. And that's what it felt. They felt a little bit more confident in what they were doing, because they had addressed that, because he called that out, the whole fact that you might have an idol, you're this power couple. He kind of sent everybody kind of reeling. And then when everybody kind of settled in and said, no, this is really who we want to work with, I feel like it came back stronger. Now we'll see as it goes through whether that ended up being the case or not. But that was my take at it at the end. And I could be proven wrong, but that's where I feel today.
Now, again, we can't know for sure how much of it was I'm going to act crazy on purpose versus he gets a little ahead of himself realizes he's coming across as crazy and then kind of rationalizes it. There could be actually a little bit of both. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he intended to act a little crazy, but maybe he didn't really expect it to go that far. He thought it was going to play out differently, and then he was a little overextended, maybe. I don't know. But I didn't like it. What that felt like to me is you're in a small boat with someone, and all of a sudden they go, hey, watch this. And then they start shaking the boat, and you don't quite go over, but it's a little scary. And then when he stops, he says, wasn't that fun? Aren't we bonded now? And I'm kind of like, yeah, sure, great.
I can totally see that. For me, it's funny though that your reaction partly, you know, I think it somewhat justifies the way that I took it, which was it was meant to be not just like a call out, like it meant to make people legitimately uncomfortable, and it worked on me, it worked on you, like it made everybody. He made the whole situation super uncomfortable. And I think that's what he was trying to do. And again, whether that worked or we agree with it, that I think that's a good debate. But
yeah,
like the purpose wasn't, you know, and there may have been, like you said, a little bit of I meant to go over this, but it felt like the plan was, I want everybody to feel uncomfortable. I don't want to just, and then let's see where everything lands.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I don't think that's a good strategy. I think he took people who were totally on his side and made them tentatively on his side.
Right. And
I think people willing to go along with him for now, but knowing now that he's a little bit unstable and you can't necessarily count on him, that from the position of initially saying, hey, we're a solid 4, isn't this great? And now it's like, wow, okay, well, I think we still want to stick with this for now, but whoa. That's what it felt like to me, is that he took a stable situation and made it unstable, and just because it didn't completely blow up, because at this point, like, it wouldn't make sense for them to vote out someone who's obviously a physical asset.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, at the same time, like, it felt kind of bully-like to me, and I didn't like it. And it doesn't make me like, and again, it's like, doesn't make him a bad person. But I tell you, if I was on the tribe with him, I would be really wary about trusting him with anything after that.
Yeah, I could see that. You know, and again, it depends on what some of these conversations that happened that we didn't see, and where all that shook out. So I think we'll learn a lot in the coming.
True. I mean, you know, for all we know, he like went to them afterwards, but I mean, like, it sounded to me like even in the tribal council there was still a little bit of tension there, but I don't know.
Yeah. I can see that when, you know, creating tension for the sake of creating tension, may not have been the best strategy. We'll see, you know, but it comes back to like where he's coming from and what he's used to from gamesmanship. Whereas, you know, what he's used to, there's an advantage to, you know, making your opponent uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah. In any event, let's rewind back to the beginning of the episode. We start, as has been the standard for many seasons, everybody on a ship. You know, this is, you know, it's not every time, but you know, the idea of, oh, hey, everybody grab supplies and then, you know, get to your boats. This one actually struck me as a little more chaotic even than usual. There's a lot of just loose fruit and stuff just floating in the ocean afterwards.
Yep.
We have Mike in the show coming across as extremely nerdy, just right off the bat. Like, introducing himself as a sex doctor with that smile of like, haha, aren't I funny?
Yeah, I thought he might be the first to go.
Yeah, me too. I mean, he had some interesting stuff as it played out a little bit, but yeah, my first impression of him was like, whoa, that's a little awkward. But hey, we'll see. It's always about these first impressions don't always hold out. We had Cole talking about wanting to open up the world for people. Allie does whatever needs to be done. And then we have Ryan on the Hustler Tribe saying, he hopes that the rest of his tribe has got the macho parts handled, like building the shelter and fishing and so on. And then we have everyone kind of loosely color coded too, with blue for heroes, yellow healers, and reddish pink for hustlers.
Mm-hmm.
And Ryan finds the secret advantage. He seems pretty sharp for this first episode so far. I think if he doesn't get ahead of himself, I think he seems like he could be a really strong player.
Yes, I liked him.
Mm-hmm. So this whole supply thing is kind of a mini challenge because they have to, it's the dilemma of like the longer you take, the more supplies you might end up with, but the first batch gets the big fire making kit, then second flint, and then so on. It's very chaotic. But the healers are the one that win just barely ahead of heroes, but the hustlers were way out of it in that one and got a lot of ribbing from Probst. Stuff like, oh, they don't even know what show they're on. Can't get it together.
Yep.
So let's see. We have as we follow the tribes to their respective beaches, in addition to the quote huge fire making kit, they also have a great big bonfire waiting for them at their camp. It's very dramatic. And Rourke talks about the healers being used to team-based environments, which should help them in the tribe dynamics. And I think that seems largely plausible. They seem to get along relatively well. Even though some of them, like Joe, is, secretly plotting. Does the whole thing about he has a big heart, but he's also the most strategic. So really, they're just all my victims. Such a weird thing to say.
It was.
I mean, he's kind of charismatic, but that as soon as he said that, I'm like, oh, really? That's the language of that's a little more aggressive than I expected. Although I suppose he is the probation officer, so so we can imagine his type of healing being a little more of the tough love variety than say a nurse.
Yes.
All right, and then we have the heroes getting right to work on the shelter. Ashley talks about how heroes put others before themselves, which makes for a great tribe. But Alan does talk about he's planning to sprint right out of the gate. And at this point, we see him immediately planning with Ben, JP, and Ashley and making a 4, but then also immediately deciding that 2 of that 4 are a power couple that need to be split up, which seems like it's completely contradictory strategies to me. I don't get it. Why be so concerned about the power couple and still make them 2 of your 4-person alliance? I don't follow.
Well, I mean, he does he does test that out a little bit later, and it doesn't. He didn't get any traction trying to go the other way.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, you know, I'm willing to allow him to change my first impression of him, but my first impression was that he's introduced unnecessary tension in a way that made me uncomfortable and didn't bring it back. But yeah, we talked about that a little already.
Mm-hmm.
So we have Ben talking about Chrissy and Katrina as the mom squad. And it's interesting in retrospect, as we mentioned a little bit already, that the editing kind of made it seem to us like Chrissy and Katrina were a pair. But it seems like they were only really a pair in the sense that they weren't part of the other four,
Right.
as opposed to them really having any connection with each other. Or at least we certainly didn't.
They're only connected by age and sort of life stage. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. At the Hustlers camp, it seemed like Lauren was the one that kind of wanted to try to take charge of the shelter building. You know, stepped up and to try to be a little bit more of a supervisor position. That's, I guess, what I was looking for. With building the shelter, and we have Allie wanting to connect with people, and she kind of connects with Patrick, who already has an awkward looking sunburn and forgot that he had a crab in his pants. Which is just, I
Yes.
kind of feel like, how can I not already be looking forward to every time he's on screen after that introduction?
True.
You know, as a redhead, he has pasty white skin, which I'm familiar with, and I can imagine that sunburn, but just the idea of having sort of a very short sleeve t-shirt on, getting burned around it, and then going without the shirt, just, it's very obvious sunburn lines, and it was just kind of like, oh, yeah, that's not a great look. But then I forgot I had a crab in my pants. That's just, I can't get over that. That's fantastic. Yeah. I hope he continues to be a source of entertainment in that fashion. It sounds from the preview like maybe that's the case, that he's kind of a doofus, but a lovable one. Or maybe not. We don't know. There's it's interesting because we actually have some discussion. Patrick actually raises the question of how maybe there was a clue. Did anyone see anything? And Ryan doesn't tell anybody, but it's it's shows some awareness on the part of the others that just because they didn't find it doesn't mean that they assume there wasn't anything. And Ryan jokes that everyone wants to get in his pants because he has the advantage there. And we learn what it is, which is an interesting idea, even though, as we talked about it, it kind of ended up fizzling a little bit. But I like the idea that if his tribe doesn't go to the tribal council, he has to give it to someone else based on very limited information, and they won't know who did it.
Right. That's it. It's a cool idea. It's just so difficult to find a way to use it that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And you feel like you don't want them to have something like that every week or anything. So it's like,
well, I think that's one of the themes of the season, though, is like secret news stuff. So maybe it won't all be this dramatic, but I think there's going to be multiple things. Like the fact that they've kept the tiebreaker a secret.
I guess I wasn't even aware of that. Was that something they talked about in an article or something?
Yeah.
So, well, so we learn about it, and we'll discover more of the future secrets too. And so, like, I like as we said, this is a cool idea, even if sometimes if nothing else, it's kind of further evidence to the point that this game is not just all fake, in the sense that sometimes there's a cool idea that ends up fizzling because of just that doesn't work out in terms of who ends up finding it and how they use it.
Yeah. Well, and even just like thinking back through this, though, it's hard to think of a situation based on like how she played it out. Mm-hmm. There's only a couple of unique situations where this would work correctly.
Well, if she thought she was the target, for one, she could have saved herself?
She could have. She was after, it was post vote. So if she was the target, it saved somebody who potentially was the target. Which, again, what is that other than like knock off somebody that wasn't a target? Like, she remains the target if that happens.
Well, potentially, but staying in just one more week is potentially enough to change it up. You know what I mean?
It does. However, like, these early votes are typically fairly unanimous by the time they get to it because no one has. So now you've, just like we said, the reason why she chose not to do it, even if you're the target, like, yeah, you have to use it, obviously, and you stay in another week and you have a chance. But what are the odds if all 5 of them, like what are the odds if Katrina had it and used it herself? That, I mean, it would be very difficult for her to come back.
Well, true, but I mean, anything could happen though, because the tribe could not lose another challenge for 2 weeks, and then there's a switch.
Correct.
A swap, right?
Exactly. So that's one situation, is that you actually give it to the person, you get a 1 in 6 shot of getting it right. Mm-hmm. That it's the person who's actually going to be voted out. The other thing is, if you're somebody who just wants to rock the boat, to use your earlier descriptive, but just wants to do that early, wants to come out gunning and make a statement. Those are really the only 2 people that it really makes sense. And now you're, like you said, you're once removing it to someone else who doesn't know anything about these people, to have the ability to pick somebody who's one of those 2 personalities. The odds are just not in favor of it being used. And so, yeah, I mean, it was interesting. It sounded cool, but when you really go back and think about it, the odds of it getting used are very low.
I suppose. Yeah, I mean, I guess I could see that. Where was I in the notes? Yeah, so I mean, that's kind of the, the layout here. And, I tend to agree that it seems like this particular iteration of that advantage seems unlikely that they would use it in quite this way again, like maybe not right out of the boat. Like it's almost something that I think maybe would work better a little later into the season.
Yes.
But of course they have more plans, I'm sure. So we have the Healer Tribe talking about focusing on communication, which is kind of a repeat of the team-oriented stuff from earlier. And this is where we have Mike talking about how his kid told him to look for an idol, and we can probably say after the fact that his kid probably, if he had thought to think about it, would thought to mention it, would be to say, but don't do it so much right away that it becomes the thing that people notice about you. Mm-hmm. That said, Joe is kind of acting very cop-like just right away. And
he is acting also like the character that he promised us, in that, I'm going to be like Russell and, Richard Hatch, or I forget who the 2 that he, quoted. I mean, he's already scheming like he's going to behave like that,
Right. But it was definitely, I can totally get why Mike would find that pretty off-putting, especially when it's a situation of like, well, he actually hasn't found it, and to be accused of having found it and then not believed when he tells the truth. That's not endearing.
No, but to be fair to Joe, I mean, Mike has also been acting kind of odd, and
that's true. It's I mean, Joe for sure had reason to suspect, and he was trying to push on that and to just really be sure one way or the other. And I think by the end of that conversation, he probably did believe him, but kind of tried to turn it around by the end, like, oh, well, you're gonna, even if you really don't have it, you still have to deal with how everyone thinks that knows that you were looking. And Mike actually has a relatively level-headed response to all that, which is where I started to like him a little bit more, which was just the idea of like, well, I didn't like his approach, but at the same time, it certainly reveals to me that I need to be more careful about how I'm being perceived in this situation, because whether I have it or not, if people think I have it because I've been looking so much, that's going to be something I'll have to deal with.
Yes.
Let's see. And then we have Ryan over at the Hustler Tribe again. Wants an opportunity to connect with Devin. And the two of them bond a little bit over Ryan telling him about the advantage, which, it's one of those things we've talked about before, in the sense of having an idol and using it in two ways, right? Like, one, it has the actual official power, but in the other is by sharing that secret information with someone, you can bond with them a bit. And
yes.
I wonder, like, Devin seems like a fine guy. I mean, he's kind of, at least from our first impressions here, he seems like exactly the sort of guy you would expect to be a surf instructor.
Yes.
He is like the archetypal surf instructor. And I can't help but think that while he's probably a fine guy to hang out with, I can't help but think that Ryan is doing a little bit of, I can use him. You know what I mean? Like, he does not seem like the kind of guy who's going to have his own schemes behind my back. So if I can get him on my side, it's a second vote for me, and I don't have to worry about him scheming behind my back.
Well, yeah, it also feels like Ryan picked somebody who is his polar opposite and said, this has worked before, where, two people who see the game in different ways and have different skill sets.
Yeah.
Like Devin is going to be, like, I think there's a strategy to it as well. Like, Devin is going to be a part of, he feels like he's hedging that Devin will be a part of the majority because he's somewhat unassuming. Other people will probably also think that Devin is not going to be strategizing behind their back, so they'll be pretty upfront with him with like how things are going and what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Ryan will glean a lot of information if he's close with Devin.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought he handled it really well.
Yeah.
I know we talked in our snap judgments about how we thought, Ryan might be funny. He is. He is very funny in that sarcastic way, but he also is, he's, well, I think he might have even been the one that described it. Like, he wanted to play like Cochran in like his second time around or whatever.
Yeah.
And that is more of what he's doing. He's sort of that same personality type, but he's not going in with that paranoia that Cochran had. He has a little bit more of the confidence in what he's doing, and he's more subdued, kind of like Cochran the second time around.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was an apt description of how he's attempting to play the game and how he's so far successfully playing. So
right. He doesn't seem to have the same level of anxiety that Cochran frequently displayed, even in his second season. He's a little more comfortable in his own skin, it seems like. Yes.
And I think that bodes very well for him.
Mm-hmm.
Unless he overplays a hand at some point.
Yeah, yeah. So I think he seems like a very strong player out of the gate, but obviously a lot can happen when we're only at the beginning of the season. There's been plenty of good players done in just by sheer dumb luck or just by getting a little ahead of themselves or all sorts of things. This is also at the point in the episode where we have the whole bit with Alan, who, wary of JP and Ashley as a power couple, basically comes in and accuses JP of having the idol. He's basically doesn't believe him when he says he doesn't have it. You know, takes up the suggestion of, well, I'll drop my pants to show you. Turn around. And, you know, at the same time that I can buy that some of that was like a bit of an affectation, because, you know, like at a certain point but at the same time, like, it didn't come across to me as someone who had a premeditated strategy to say, I am going to act crazy for a purpose. Maybe he intended to challenge them in order to kind of want to say, first, I want to know if they have the idol. So I like, if they do or do not, I want to know the answer. I would think that's a very reasonable priority in this conversation, right? Get a sense of what they do when pressed a little bit, right? And all of that makes sense from a certain perspective. But I guess where it falls apart for me is I just don't see the sense in, like, it's one thing if you are saying this is a power couple, I think that's dangerous. I want the tribe to have suspicion on them so that we can break them up. And that's the plan. But his plan seems to be to do that and then rely on them to vote with him in the way that he wants them to.
Well, he does. I'm saying he did test out later. He went to Ben, I think it is.
Well, Ben is the other person in there.
Right. And he floated the idea about, should we just do this now? And Ben was the one that dug in and said, no, I think we should trust the two of them. And this is where, like I said, where it comes kind of full circle for me is he can trust that Ben believes in trusting them because he put it all out there. Like, he put everybody in that uncomfortable situation. He called it out. He made sure everybody knew, and it was all the cards are on the table, that everybody knows that these guys are a potential power couple. He was able to ensure they didn't have an idol. And then, so when Ben comes to him, or when he goes to Ben and says, hey, like, you know, now that we know this, we've all agreed this, what would you think about voting for one of them? And Ben says, I still think it's the best thing to stay with them. Ben's words mean more to him now because Ben has been a part of all of this, like, uncomfortable situation. He still thinks that's the better choice. And so Alan says, okay, that's the better choice.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's where, like, I'm kind of giving him some benefit of the doubt for the way that this worked out.
Well, yeah.
Totally understand your position. And that's why I can't take a partner position because it's sort of a complicated, it's an odd way to play it.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe part of what rubs me the wrong way about it is that, to the extent that I give him credit that he was doing all of that deliberately, it makes me like him less as a person. Because if his strategy is to control people by making them aggressively uncomfortable and doing what he wants to appease him, maybe that will work, but I sure don't enjoy watching it.
Totally fair. Yeah.
It's kind of a bully tactic, right? It's you get people to say what you want them to say so that you'll stop yelling at them.
Yeah, see, Yeah, I don't interpret it that way, but I understand how it is interpreted that way.
Mm.
I didn't feel like he was trying to get people to say what he wanted to get them to stop yelling. I felt like he was trying to make sure that this wasn't something, because it's kind of like a hyper of the tactic, like like think of office politics, and people are talking, oh well, this person really just wants something because of whatever reason, and how uncomfortable is that if somebody just straight up like says in a meeting like, hey, everybody's been talking about how they disagree with this position, and they think that you took this position because of this reason, and like you laid out, like nobody wants to talk about that, like nobody wants to say it out loud, everybody wants to back channel it. It just feels like a really hyper real version of that to me. And I don't find that as bullying. I find that as just, an intense variation of that, which makes everybody uncomfortable. It's like, oh, well, I thought this was all something that, like to Ben, like, oh, this was something we were going to talk about, behind the table, and the two of them being like, well, we thought that nobody knew that we were like working together because we thought we were so slick, and now it's, now it's all been called out for everybody, and that's very uncomfortable. And yeah, he did it in a way that was more aggressive than you would normally do it.
Yeah.
And that's where I want to see how that plays out. But that was my interpretation of it, which didn't make it bullying. It made it, oh, you all just want to talk behind it. Let's just call this out. Like, let's just lay this out and see where everybody lands on this, But
telling someone to drop their pants and turn around within 2 days of knowing them, it's pretty extreme.
Fair. I'm pretty sure that JP like made that statement first, and he just took it to its natural, ridiculous conclusion.
But at the same time, I think the suggestion was probably made in the sense of, this is an extreme example. You want me to drop my pants? And he's not supposed to say yes.
Right, and I think that was, like I said, sort of the natural, like, hey, I'm taking this so far, and that's where I see what you're talking about falls into, like, how much did he sort of get into his own behavior, as opposed to that being, I don't think his strategy was, oh, if he offers to do something crazy, I'm going to take him up on it. I think in the heat of the moment, like you said, he offered it without the intention, but it's not like he walked up to him and was like, take your pants off, that wasn't what happened.
I just feel like the fact that JP seems like he was more or less not too bothered by it ultimately doesn't excuse the fact that Alan had no way of knowing that would be the case. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah. So again,
I'm not trying to be like what Alan did. Like, I'm not making the case that like this is the greatest strategy and you should really enjoy what he did. I can totally see why all of those things, and don't disagree with your perspective at all. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out as to whether it was, whether he continues with this type of stuff, or if this was a, sort of a group storming,
Yeah. I mean,
and then with the norm, like, it'll be okay. Or is he just going to always storm every group? Like, then that's where he has the chance to win back his first impression on you. Is if I mean, like, hey, I came in firing, and got the result that I wanted, and that everybody started to be a little bit more open about how things were. Ultimately, we all lay down in the way that we originally planned, because even though we tried some other options, but we explored them knowing that what was going on. Now I'm going to carry through with a little bit more of a normal plan. Then he wins you back. But if he goes the other way, and this is just his strategy, is just to be like disruptive in a way that's like makes him seem kind of crazy, well, then he's going to lose me, So
and so I'm open to him redeeming himself by changing his behavior, but he's sure going to have to change his behavior.
And I'm open to him not himself by continuing to behave this way. So,
but I just mean, like, Ashley's confessional after that whole thing was basically her saying, I thought that he was a strong ally, and now I see him as a liability. And I'm thinking, Alan, you did that to yourself. Oh, yikes. Luna's got a hair in her throat or something, and she makes this awful noise when that happens.
That is awful.
Yeah, that's awful. So you talk for a second while I mute the microphone.
All right. Into Ashley's confessional, I keep defending this, but I feel like that was part of what he was trying to do. I think he wanted to put her on edge a little bit and was therefore successful. And we can agree or disagree, like whether that was the right strategy. But yes, he did that to himself, but I feel like he fully knew and intended for that to be part of the case, knowing that he was then later going to float getting rid of Ashley. If he can put her in that uncomfortable thing where if she starts, like, let's say she takes that to another step and says, okay, well, he's a liability now, and starts to make moves against him. Well, now he's got that counterpoint of like, oh, well, but Ben, now you got to take sides because Ashley's coming for me now, and I have Katrina and Chrissy, and Ashley wants me gone. Where are you going to fall? So again, whether that's the right thing to do or not, it felt like that was the calculus in that. And so Ashley's response was what he intended to happen, and that wasn't like he wouldn't. I feel like if he sees that, he's going to be like, well, why did she take it that way? I think he'd be like, that's exactly how she was supposed to take it. Now, whether that's right or wrong is a point of disagreement now, and we'll wait to be seen how that plays out. But to that point, I think he did do it to himself on purpose.
Fair enough. I was kind of nodding. Luna is still making the noise. I will be.
So I don't usually do this part of it. Chris is the one that normally kind of carries these things through these lull periods. Let's see what happens next. So we already talked about Ryan working with Devin. I think we're actually, in some manner, have worked our way to the immunity challenge. The immunity challenge is that the castaways race up to a cart on net, top of the tower, and they pull the heavy cart up the tower. Then they get to choose the different mazes, which I really do want to talk about maze selection and which tribes may or may not have made the right decision with their mazes. I feel like, and what was seemed to be bared out in the way that the challenge happened, is that the straight line maze was the easiest, but the traditional maze is the one that grabs your attention, and that's the one that you want to pick first because it's a known quantity. Like, you're not used to working mazes the way that the other two work. And so you dive to that when in reality, that's actually the most time-consuming maze. So Chris is back. Hopefully Luna is okay. And I'm probably going to have to repeat myself since I'm not good at this sort of filling time.
That's all right. Sorry about that. I think she's under control. That's longer than it usually lasts. It's just, like I said, that's the noise she makes when she gets like a hair down her throat or something. Yeah. All right. So anyway, if there's something you need me to hear, then I'll certainly hear it later. Otherwise, we can.
Well, I took us into the immunity challenge.
Okay, great.
The basic mechanism of it. So we don't have to go through that unless you had some like real strong thoughts of like how it worked. Where I was starting to opine was the maze selection.
Yes, that's a cool idea. The idea of having the three options and they're not all the same. Because we've had challenges before where you can choose one or the other, but everyone is choosing between the same two, right? As opposed to
it actually being removed once someone chooses it.
Yeah, I like it.
So here was my thought that I started going on, that will be a repeat for anyone who's listening, unless you edit this out later. But if anyone's live, then they're going to hear a repeat. Is I feel like, and what was also bared out by the challenge, is that straight line is actually the easiest and quickest to solve. But where the trick of the challenge is that the traditional maze is the one that catches your eye first, because you know that's a known quantity. So when you're the first, you're like, oh yeah, well, we want that one because we know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
The other two look different than a normal maze, so it's like I'm not sure that we. Whereas really the traditional maze it takes a long time to solve because of just the nature of how it's built. Mm-hmm. So the fact that the other two looked different, they were actually chosen later, but they were easier to navigate, which is why it bared out that way. And I loved that psychology that was put into there, because that was the first thing I thought when I first saw it. I was like, oh yeah, you take that one, like that one, you know what it is. And then I kind of stepped back and I said, no, let's watch these. Like, how do these work? I said, you know what? I bet that straight line one is actually the easiest, because once you kind of solve the teamwork thing, the balls just roll through.
Yeah.
And you don't have to, like, once you solve the teamwork thing on the traditional maze, you still have to solve the maze 3 times. Whereas the other one's really just the working together thing. And and then it bared out that way. And I was like, that's ingenious how they, your mind goes to what's familiar, even if it's not the most advantageous for you.
Yeah, the fast ones seem riskier, like it's a trick, like it's a catch, and to some extent, I'm sure it's true that the one that's a much more defined maze, you have dramatically less risk of it falling and you having to start over from the beginning.
Right.
But it takes a lot longer to get through it, but it is really, I agree, fascinating that the one that was left, so the third tribe to pick, being stuck with what's left, does it so fast that they end up getting first place.
Well, yeah, I mean, because by the nature of it, it was like, yes, the ball fall, like you instantly fail every time you are unsuccessful. You don't have that safety net, like you said, of a traditional maze. You kind of lock it in a spot, sort of reset, get yourself reoriented, get your team back on. Like, you have a lot of that time, but all of those things take time. Whereas if you can actually start to be able to work together, then it is literally just dumping the ball. Once you're both doing it in the same cadence. So there's a little bit of trial and error to get to that, but once it's solved, and but like you said, it doesn't. It looks like a trick. It looks like it's gonna be harder. Like, well, that looks dangerous, but in reality, it was actually the easiest one. Assuming they work together. If they can't do it together, then that one you will always fit.
Yeah. But yeah, I thought that was a really cool mechanic. And then we have at the end, though. So we get the healers win first place, hustlers second, and then the heroes to tribal council. It's just especially going in third, but getting first place by a lot. That was interesting. But then it was really close for the last two, second and third. And we end up with, I thought it was a little interesting, Chrissy down on her hands and knees and throwing up a little bit, like just in the sense that it seems like the last thing they did was this maze that I kind of would have thought that part would be, it's intense, but not aerobic, I guess. So I don't know. It seemed like maybe it was just that she was kind of holding it together and sort of the tension. She didn't really let her body rest after the more, athletic part.
Yeah. I mean, well, and just to be fair, it's not it's typically anaerobic that causes that reaction.
Okay. I guess aerobic is not really the word that I meant anyway. I guess just physically
taxing.
Challenging. Taxing is a good word. There we go.
Yeah, because what typically causes like exertion throwing up is either, number one is lactic acid buildup, like that can cause you to throw up. And the other one is just like heat sickness, which may have been what she actually had.
Could be.
And that's where maybe an aerobic piece can come in, because like you just get a nauseous feeling from like you're being disoriented from like the heat sickness. But those are the two things that typically cause.
I was thinking that, like, certainly, everyone's initially very concerned, but it seemed like everyone relaxed really fast, which made me think that it was maybe more exhaustion, less dehydration. Just because I feel like if it seemed like they were diagnosing it as dehydration, heat exhaustion, they take that a little more seriously.
Which is what tends to make me think it was more of a lactic acid buildup thing, because like once you sort of have that relief, like it doesn't go away, like you're not like all of a sudden cured, but I
wonder if she's holding her breath during the maze, just like worried about messing it up or something. So if she's kind of just subconsciously, to try to avoid like messing it up or shaking it, she was holding her breath a little bit.
I mean, that's very, very likely. So
yeah. But in any case, everyone kind of it seemed like they, can't say didn't give it their all, right? And so that was kind of nice. It seems like didn't bother the rest of her tribe much. Meaning we didn't hear anything about like, oh, maybe she doesn't have what it takes, she's weak in challenges, or
maybe like mom squad, like she's the one that really should go because she can't even like handle challenges.
So we didn't really hear any of that. But what was also just interesting and notable about it is that for sure it had to be the reason that Ryan chose her to give the advantage to, just because like it made her stand out. He had reason to suspect that it might be that she would be targeted as a result, and so giving it to her makes sense in terms of shaking them up. So I think it was a good decision on his part, given how little information he had to go on.
Yeah, I mean, he made the best decision based on what he knew, and that's
I have a note here that the Blue Tribe, aka the Heroes, is also known as the Levu Tribe. And I just have that note because it was the only one of the tribe names that I actually ended up noticing during the episode.
Yawa is the one that I noticed, which is the Red Tribe.
Okay, the Hustlers.
The Hustlers,
yeah. So I guess we'll... if there's a mix-up that stays with 3, then we'll get to know them better. Otherwise, one of them will be eliminated, and we won't care what that one used to be. But so you're right. Like this is the point that you mentioned earlier, where Alan approaches Chrissy and Katrina, pitches the whole thing as though, well, hey, no one's talking to me, and it's interesting that he comes up with like a story about the strategy, instead of just going to them and saying, hey, I'm interested in taking out the power couple. Are you guys with me? Are you interested in doing that? And instead of doing that, he pitches it as like, oh, well, hey, I think I might be on the outside too. What do you think? Like I'm, so it was kind of an interesting choice. I don't have like a criticism of that like I did with some of his other stuff, but I thought it was an interesting choice to make. Maybe he was trying to be more approachable in that sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is where I said is like when I look back at how all of this played out, like it really did feel like there was some calculation to this. Like, he aggravated the power couple, and so now he can credibly say that he couldn't be with them. It doesn't seem as disingenuous as like, oh, it seems more honest because he has displayed that he's gone after them. So, when you put this and then you put his conversation with Ben and like the way that he now trusts Ben even more because Ben's seen it all laid out, like this is where I started to he started to buy back credibility with me. So,
Yeah.
and started to see that there was more of a long, like there was a more of a, like, again, a calculated piece to this, that he wasn't just flying off the handle, that he was purposely flying off the handle to make everybody uncomfortable so that he could have these conversations and feel like everybody was coming from the right place, because everybody knew where everybody stood at that point, as opposed to like, oh, we're just going to be comfortable with the four of us. We're just going to kind of sit over here until we have to become uncomfortable. Like, he forced the uncomfortable early to see how it played out.
Right. I mean, another way to describe that narrative, though, could be that he jumped into an alliance of four right away, then realized there was a power couple in it that he didn't like, so he decided he was going to try to target them. But then when he was unable to build a coalition against them, he ended up going back to the original four.
That is also possible.
Well, yeah, we'll see.
I can't argue that, but yeah. That's...
At the very least, Ben seems to have his back. So, I mean, there's something to that, at least, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we hear from Ben, he seems to be approaching it as like, well, it's Alan and me that are going to choose who we keep and who we get rid of this time. So, yeah. And so this is, we have Chrissy getting the idol only just right towards the end. And, she plans to wait and see, which in some ways is kind of the most obvious thing ever to say with this one, because what else would you do with it? Like, that's the whole benefit of the power that it has, is that you can wait. You don't have to do anything with it until you see whether you like the outcome of the voting or not.
Right.
But still, so we talked about that a fair amount already. At the tribal council, though, they just jump right into the whole bit about Alan's accusations about the idol. And Ben is, again, he seems like he's the one that's trying to calm things down. He's trying to be the steadying hand, but Alan is kind of almost manic in that tribal council, it seems like to me. Just very, I don't know, just was not quite as crazy seeming as he was, with the original accusation. But I don't know. I just like, I don't know. Maybe it's a personal thing on my part, but just the forcing tension out into the open this soon feels like it rubs me raw like sandpaper or something. I don't know. That's a weird analogy, but yeah, it makes me uncomfortable in a way that I don't like. I mean, I guess that
you get it.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll see how that develops. Katrina also says she wants everything out in the open, but I mean, at the same time, especially given what we know, is that writing was probably on the wall at that point. I wouldn't be surprised if Katrina knew also. She didn't seem especially surprised by the voting. Ben talks about damage control being needed one way or the other, however it turns out. And my guess is that that's, the basis of that is him saying, yeah, so we're ending up with a voting coalition based on me and Alan with Ashley and JP, even though we've just talked about how there was all this tension there. So, but that said, it was unanimous votes for Katrina, except for Katrina herself voting for Ashley. Chrissy does not intervene to save Katrina, which I mean is in some ways would be a surprise, except that it wasn't a surprise once we saw that she couldn't have, like, she must have voted for Katrina too. So why would she intervene at that point?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't make sense,
Yeah. And, in some ways I felt bad for Katrina. I mean, we didn't really get to see very much from her at all. especially for being voted out. You know what I mean? It's like we didn't really get to even see her do anything. And it's partly because like her getting voted out really almost didn't even have anything to do with her. She just didn't form the relationships that she needed to have people stick their neck out to save her. But that also just meant that like she was really just kind of, you know, she was the vote because everyone else had something to keep them there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not like it's, you know, like it's incumbent on her to form those connections, which she apparently was not able to do. But at the same time, it's not like she did something wrong, and like it's not like she was bad in a challenge or she, you know, pissed someone off or anything like that. It's just, no, she was just kind of the one that they could build consensus on.
Yeah, and that's what typically happens if no one does anything crazy, like on the first, couple episodes, like that's just what ends up happening. So
yep,
it's part of the deal. You got to make those relationships early.
So next time, we have Ben and Chrissy as a power couple. Well, we'll see. There's Cole and Jessica potentially being a showmance of some kind. We didn't really talk about it earlier, but there was just a little bit of her talking about having sort of a first, infatuation at first sight sort of thing, crush on him earlier, but seems like that might develop a little bit more. And then my last note from the preview is Patrick is crazy ?
Yeah.
But we'll see. I hope Patrick continues to be as entertaining as forgetting he had crab in his pants. That was just pretty good. But we're off to a start. I don't know that it's the most exciting premiere that we've ever had, but hey, there's stuff going. We've been introduced to a number of interesting players.
Yeah, it was a good starting point.
Yep. All right, so I think that'll probably do it for this time. So we'll be back next week to talk about episode 2 of Survivor Season 35, Heroes, Healers, Hustlers. Is there an and in there? Heroes, Healers, and Hustlers? Or is it? Because, like, it's outwit, outlast, outplay, not and outplay. I don't know. Who cares? I could look it up, but it's not important.
No, it's Heroes versus Healers versus Hustlers.
Oh, versus. Interesting.
Yeah, there's lots of V's in there.
Yeah. Is it a V or a VS?
It's V on the Wikipedia, but who knows what it looks like. I don't know what it looks like on the show.
Yeah, see, I don't know if I can get on board with this idea of just going with the V. I mean, Batman versus Superman did that. Just Batman v Superman.
The logo just has a V.
See, like, I guess people get it, but it just seems like it's not like VS is too long. Anyway, who cares? We'll be back next week for more Survivor Season 35, Heroes v Healers v Hustlers. I don't know what this is, but good night, everybody.
Good night.